In a small Pennsylvania town where the church bells still marked the hours and the diner always smelled like coffee and pie, lived a quiet woman named Nora Hayes. She wasn't famous and she didn't have much, but people respected her. She worked as the town librarian, always on time, always kind, always alone. Every morning she unlocked the doors at 8, turned on the soft yellow lights, and arranged the returned books like tiny treasures. Her son, Ben, was her only joy. 10 years old, full of questions, full of dreams. His father had left when he was a baby, and people still whispered about it, though never to her face. Nora had learned that small towns never forget, they just whisper softer. One Thursday afternoon in late October, the wind outside sounded like a sigh through the leaves. The old heater in the library had started rattling again, so she called Roy, the town's maintenance man. He came with his toolbox, humming a country tune, his sleeves rolled up, and a grin as warm as a summer evening. "Ducks rattling," Roy said. "Probably a bird nest or something stuck in the vent." He unscrewed a panel, reached his hand in, and pulled out something unexpected, a thick bundle wrapped in brittle brown paper covered in dust and spiderwebs. When the paper tore, an envelope slid out, its edges yellowed, its ink fading but still legible. On the front, written in careful cursive, were the words, "To Eleanor Hart, do not open until your heart is ready." Roy chuckled. Now that's a mystery right there. Nora's fingers trembled. The postmark said, Philadelphia, 1985. 40 years ago, she could hardly believe it. Something lost, buried in the library vent for decades now in her hands. That night, after closing, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She wiped the counter, turned off the lights, and slipped the envelope into her bag. At home, while Ben did his homework, she opened an old town directory and found the name Eleanor Hart, Willow Street. The next morning, Nora walked to the address. The house was small, blue, with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. When she knocked, it took a long moment before the door cracked open. "Yes," said a gentle but cautious voice. "Miss Hart?" Nora asked softly. "My name's Nora Hayes. I found something that belongs to you." The door opened wider. Before Nora stood a woman in her 80s, silver hair pinned neatly, eyes sharp and curious. When Nora held up the envelope, Eleanor froze. "I know that handwriting," she whispered, covering her mouth. "It's his." She invited Nora inside. The house smelled of lemon polish and old paper. On a side table, a photograph showed a young woman with dark hair standing beside a man in a suit, both laughing as if the world had once been kind. Eleanor took the envelope in trembling hands. "He said he'd come back in 2 weeks," she murmured. "He left for Philadelphia to start a new job, but he never came back. No phone call, no goodbye, just silence." Nora sat quietly as Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside was a letter folded once, and something small that clinked when it moved, a tiny brass key and a storage claim ticket. Eleanor began to read. "If you're reading this, it means I never made it home. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. My name isn't James Carter, not really. I worked undercover for the NYPD, investigating corruption that runs deeper than anyone will ever know. They found me out. I had to disappear to keep you safe." Her hands trembled. Nora felt her chest tighten. The letter continued. "Inside this envelope, you'll find a key and a claim ticket. Keep them safe. Go to Jefferson Storage, 3rd Street, Philadelphia. Ask for Mr. Duval. He'll know what to do. And remember what we always said. The bell is true. The apples are ours. If the apples still bloom when you read this, I'm home." At the bottom was a single initial. Eleanor placed the letter on her lap, staring at it as if time itself had stopped moving. "He told me he was a banker," she whispered. "All these years I thought he'd lied. And he did. But maybe not in the way I thought," Nora said quietly. "We can go together." Eleanor looked at her, surprised. "Why would you help me?" "Because sometimes," Nora said, "the past deserves a witness." The next morning, they boarded the 6:10 train to Philadelphia. The city rose like a memory. Brick buildings, narrow streets, the sound of distant bells. They followed the address written in the letter until they found a squat building with green doors and a faded sign, Jefferson Storage. Behind the counter sat an older man with grey hair and a calm smile. His name tag read Mr. Duval. Eleanor held out the ticket. 40 years ago, a man asked you to keep something safe." Mr. Duval looked at the paper, then at her. Slowly, he nodded. "I was told you'd come, someday." He led them down a long hallway lined with metal doors until they stopped at Unit 14. He unlocked the padlock and lifted the door. Inside, there was only a single wooden trunk. Nothing more. "He told me to keep it closed until you came," Duval said quietly. "Said it wasn't mine to open." Eleanor knelt down. There, resting on top of the trunk, was an old metronome still ticking, though no one had wound it. She stopped it with her finger. "He used to say being on time was a form of love," she whispered. Nora and Eleanor exchanged a look. Together they opened the trunk. Inside were 3 things: a leather notebook embossed with the letter J, a police badge tarnished and burned, and a sealed envelope labeled "For Eleanor, open last." Eleanor picked up the badge. Her voice shook. "He told me he worked at a bank, not the police." Nora turned the badge over. The engraving read, "New York City Police Department, Detective." Eleanor's lips parted, and her voice fell to a whisper. "Ms. Hayes, what did he get himself into?" And at the bottom of the trunk, under the notebook, there was one final note written in his unmistakable handwriting. "If the bell rings, follow the apples. If the apples fall, forgive me." Nora and Eleanor stood in silence, the past breathing around them like a ghost that had finally found its voice. Eleanor took the last envelope in her hands and looked at Nora. "Whatever's inside," she said softly, "it started with love." She broke the seal, and the first line made her gasp, a sound so sharp and deep that Nora would remember it for the rest of her life. Eleanor's trembling hands unfolded the pages. The air inside the storage room felt thick, heavy, as if even the dust understood that something sacred was about to be spoken aloud. Her lips moved slowly as she began to read. "If you're reading this, it means my time ran out. I couldn't make it back to you, not because I didn't try, but because someone made sure I wouldn't. I left everything inside this trunk, the evidence, the truth, and my last words to you. I was part of something bigger, Eleanor, something dark, men in uniform who sold justice for power. I couldn't stop them all, but I exposed enough to make enemies I couldn't outrun." Eleanor's voice cracked. Her eyes glistened under the dim light. Nora stayed silent, letting the moment breathe. "They told me you'd be safer if you thought I was dead. I let you believe that. I'm sorry. It's the only lie I've ever told you. The truth is, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. But love, real love, sometimes means disappearing before the storm reaches the ones you care about." Her tears finally fell. 40 years of waiting turned into something else. Not sadness, not anger. Release. At the bottom of the page was one last line. If you still believe in us, plant the seed I left for you. It's small, but it's everything I have left to give. If the apples grow, then maybe I came home after all." Eleanor reached inside the envelope again and found a small piece of cloth. She unwrapped it, a tiny apple seed, dried but still intact. Next to it, a photograph, her and James standing by a tree in full bloom, smiling at a future that never came. She held the photo to her chest. "He remembered," she whispered. Nora knelt beside her. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor wiped her tears, her voice trembling, but sure. "What he asked, I'm going to plant it." The next morning, the two women took the early train back home. Neither spoke much. Words felt too small for what they carried. When they arrived, the sun was low, painting the churchyard gold. Eleanor walked up the old stone steps, holding the seed like a prayer. She dug a small hole beneath the church bell tower, the place where she and James had met all those years ago at a charity auction. She pressed the seed into the soil with trembling fingers. Nora stood behind her. "It's strange," she said softly. "A man spends his life chasing truth and ends up leaving it in a seed." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Because truth grows, Ms. Hayes. You just have to give it time." Weeks turned into months. The snow came and the churchyard turned silent. But when spring arrived, something green pushed through the ground, a fragile sprout, small yet stubborn. Eleanor visited every morning, wrapped in her cardigan, humming the same melody she used to share with James. Nora often came with her son Ben, who would ask endless questions about the man in the photograph. "Was he brave?" Ben once asked. Eleanor smiled. "He was scared. But he did what was right anyway. That's what real courage looks like." Years passed. The tree grew, stretching its branches toward the bell tower. Apples began to appear. Not many, but enough to prove that life has a way of keeping its promises. By then, Eleanor was frail, her silver hair thinner, her steps slower. One afternoon, she called Nora and said, "I think it's time for one last visit." Nora drove her to the church. The tree was tall now, strong, covered in blossoms. The air smelled sweet. Eleanor reached out and touched the trunk with a trembling hand. "I waited for him to come back," she said softly. "But I think he already did. Every year this tree blooms, it's him saying, 'I made it home.'" She looked at Nora and smiled. "Promise me something." "Anything," Nora said. "When I'm gone, take one of these apples to your son. Tell him not all goodbyes mean the end. Some are just a different kind of beginning." Nora nodded, her eyes wet. Eleanor passed peacefully that winter. On the day of her funeral, the church bell rang louder than anyone had ever heard it. The townspeople gathered beneath the apple tree that she had planted 40 years too late, and yet right on time. Nora stood beside Ben, holding one of the apples Eleanor had left behind. She placed it gently at the base of the tree and whispered, "The world lies, but the bell is true." The wind rose, carrying the scent of apples and the echo of the bell through the town, a sound that seemed to blend past and present, sorrow and peace. Ben looked up at her. "Mum," he said softly, "do you think they found each other again?" Nora smiled. "I think they never really lost each other." The bell rang once more, deep, honest, final. And in that sound, carried through time, love, and forgiveness, two souls who had been separated by a lifetime finally came home. Moral of the story: sometimes love doesn't ask you to wait. It asks you to understand. And when the world seems silent, the truth might just be waiting inside a letter that took a lifetime to arrive.